There are a lot of ways to write an interesting villain. You can make them morally gray with a believable motivation and have them resort to extreme dogmatic means. You can make them irredeemable and play into the hate that the viewers feel towards the character. Or you can make them unpredictable but incredibly threatening, thus keeping both the audience and the other characters in the story on their toes. Making a memorable villain is about making the audience feel something about the character. It can be fear, hatred, anticipation, and even shock. But a subversive villain is a risky one. If done well, they can leave an imprint on the viewer and on the hero, but if executed poorly, this can backfire, causing the villain to look and feel comedic in nature, which works for some characters but isn't always the goal. And it's why out of all of Invincible's rogues that we've seen in the show so far, there's one that really stands out to me, and that's Titan. And in this video, we're going to get into how the show uses Titan to break down writing tropes that we've come to expect in superhero media. As you can expect, this video contains spoilers for the entire Invincible television show, but not the comics. Thus, if you want to talk about the comics in the comment section, please use a spoiler warning. And with that, let's talk about Titan. He is first introduced in the very first episode in the series, Season 1, Episode 1. And what's interesting to me is that he's shown as a one-off villain of the week that isn't a real threat. In fact, he's the very first superpowered villain that Mark faces off against. And for people who haven't read the comics, this guy is seemingly just another low-level goon. But later on in the first season, in episode 5, we actually dive into Titan as a character. And I love when superhero media does this, which is taking an obscure character that doesn't really seem all that threatening and exploring who they are. In recent memory, there's the Spot in the Spider-Verse sequel and Kite Man, hell yeah, who got his own series. But going back to Invincible, in season 1, episode 5, we get a montage of both Titan and Mark. And usually dual montages revolving around two characters serves as a literal juxtaposition, showing how they contrast each other. For example, Rocky IV, where Rocky Balboa's and Ivan Drago's workouts are paralleled. And this is the case for Titan and Invincible, and I believe the parallel here is Titan's sympathy contrasted with Mark's relative apathy. The first scene of the episode is Titan going up against a bunch of gang members, but it turns out that they work for the head of the Order, a superpowered crime syndicate, and they were operating on his territory. But he only kills the gunmen who oppose him. If they retreat or surrender, he doesn't chase them down. In fact, we even see one of them again in Season 3. The episode then cuts to Mark throwing hands against Kilcannon. It only takes him 2 punches to take the supervillain out, but I want to call attention to some of the big differences here. Titan shows mercy. He doesn't try to chase down the guys who are retreating. In fact, the guy who I mentioned earlier blasts him in the face with a shotgun. But Titan still tells him to just go, and sparing his life in the process. There's also another scene in the episode where Titan steals a microchip from a lab, but instead of murdering the security guards, he tells them to shoot their guns in the air instead of trying to stop him, so they can escape with their lives intact. Meanwhile, Kilcannon surrenders after just a single punch sends him flying. He puts both his hands up, but Invincible still tries to get one more hit in. This duality between these two characters highlights their sympathy for their antagonists. Titan, being a low-level goon himself, knows that the gunmen and security guards are just trying to do their jobs, and spares those who stop getting in his way. Meanwhile, Mark just casually commits a war crime. The next scene in the montage is Titan burning a building down, displacing civilians, but he gives his own money to the displaced former residents. He even suggests a place where they can stay for a while as they get back on their feet. Then the scene shifts to Mark beating down on a different villain and throwing her through an apartment building. And as it turns out, there's innocent people in there, and Mark just leveled their living room wall. And all he can do is hold the building up as it crumbles, while telling the residents to get their stuff and apologizing for ruining their home. Once again, the difference in sympathy for others is on full display. Titan was forced to burn down a building on orders from Machine Head, but he still chose to help the displaced residents, while Mark recklessly endangered civilians by throwing a villain through a building. I also want to point out Mark completely levels some random guy's car when fighting against Kilcannon, so maybe Powerplex was right. And then we cut to both characters threatening to drop someone from height. Titan spares his victim, seemingly after witnessing he has a daughter. Meanwhile, Mark hesitates to drop his guy, a supervillain, but it's ultimately Nolan who does it instead, showing his son how it's supposed to be done. Mark is a good guy, a superhero, but he acts with impunity to the civilians around him. In contrast, Titan is a villain, but he still cares enough to value the lives of others. And I find it interesting how his power reflects this part of his character. He can generate a layer of stone over his skin, giving him a level of protection, but at his core, he's still a person. On the outside, yeah, he is a hardened criminal, but he's still got a bleeding heart, not one made of stone. Titan is a family man with a wife and a sickly daughter, and it's revealed that he's only doing criminal work because he's indebted to Machine Head. So the show kind of sets him up to be this sympathetic criminal, someone forced to do bad deeds because of his situation. But a good person being forced to do bad things isn't the most novel idea in this day and age. We literally got the same thing shown to us later on in Season 3 through a cold open featuring Tether Tyrant and Mag Maniac. The funny thing with Titan is, he's still evil. See, usually the bad guy will turn into a good guy after teaming up with the hero, but Titan just leverages Mark to ascend the bad guy ladder, though with noble intentions. He wants to displace Machine Head as the city's crime boss, and genuinely wants to improve people's lives. But he also wants to get rich and ensure that his family is taken care of. In any other story, Titan would become a superhero after this, and try out for the Guardians or something. But this is the Invincible universe. And one thing that I absolutely adore about Invincible's writing, especially in Season 3, is how it explores morality as a concept. This is a show where we see bad people save the day and good people become morally corrupted. And this guy, who is a loving father and husband, who wants to better his community, and from what we've seen is actually kind of noble, is actually a bad guy, and I love that. And it really goes to show how incredible Invincible is at blurring the line between good and evil. But I think what I love most about Titan so far is how he's framed. See, comic book nerds love to power scale characters, and usually one of the lowest ranking characters are the street level ones. These are the ones that typically handle things like bank robberies and kidnappings. Think people like Nightwing from DC or the Defenders from Marvel. Their powers, or in the case of Dick Grayson, his lack thereof, aren't exactly great for taking care of alien invasions, but they do help stand up for the little guy. But usually we see street level heroes grow on to take bigger threats. Both Batman and Spider-Man started out as street level, but when the plot requires them, and probably due to their immense popularity, they're able to rise on occasion to defeat foes like Thanos and Darkseid. But we rarely get to see the opposite, which is an all-powerful hero go back down to the street level. After all, Mark is a Viltrumite, and it's no secret that Viltrumites take heavy inspiration from Kryptonians and Superman comics. But if you take a look at Superman's most well-known villains, they're mostly planetary threats. General Zod is an evil Kryptonian. Brainiac is a conqueror of worlds. Doomsday is, well, Doomsday. Even Lex Luthor can become a planetary threat given enough money and alien technology. Note, I'm not saying that Superman doesn't have street-level threats. I'd love to see a character like Toyman get revisited in a movie. It's just most of the popular iterations of this character don't really tackle this level of crime. And in that same vein, Invincible is, in his own words, a big picture guy. And that's despite not being a superhero for very long at this point in the story. He faces the Flaxen invasion, oversees the Mars mission, saves Mount Rushmore, and prevents a meteor from crashing into the planet. And yet Titan is able to manipulate this guy into doing his dirty work. In a sense, defeating him not once, but twice. And yet Titan is a street level character through and through. While I wouldn't pick him in a head-to-head fight, he's still able to get the better of Invincible because he's cunning, manipulative, and intelligent, which is a complete subversion of what you would expect when you look at a guy with his powers. And that's why Titan is Invincible's most subversive antagonist, at least so far. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button and drop a comment down below. Subscribe if you haven't already so I can see you in the next one.